Well, this morning it is my privilege to welcome you back to our series on faith and relationships to really help us be healthy in our relationships of all types, parents to children, employer to employee, boyfriend to girlfriend. And today we have a great guest speaker here. Dr. Nick Howard is a Christian psychologist, an executive coach, and trainer. Nick earned his doctorate from Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois. Nick loves to help people grow, and this is evident, and I think you will see it today as he speaks to you. He has spent over 20 years entering people's worlds to help them navigate life in more fulfilling ways that they can find greater life in the gospel of God. It is clear to me that he is a man who loves the Lord and desires for us to live in the relational fullness that God has for us. So please give your ear to Dr. Nick Howard.
Thank you, June, for the warm introduction. You know, the last time I spoke at a college chapel was my senior year in college, which was roughly 100 years ago, okay? And just to give you a feel for what it was like for me in college, and because I actually took a look at some of my yearbooks, I thought I would let you know what life was like for me in college. And so I've got some pictures here I'd like to show you. The first one is me enjoying football practice. And so, as you'll notice, as Robert gets with me there, I'm second on the left, really enjoying practice. Okay, that was supposed to be funnier than that, but we'll keep going. All right, the next slide is me in my nutritional science class, which I totally loved. It just totally rocked, and I really enjoyed the suit that I'm wearing. I'm the third on the right there. Now, I didn't date a ton in college, and so I couldn't find any pictures of me in the yearbook. They never caught that on film, but I've got a buddy that they did catch on film, and so this is my buddy on his way to the ice cream parlor to enjoy some ice cream, and sadly enough, it didn't work out, but that's what life was like for me in college. It was a great time. It was a great time. Well, that's actually not true. I'm not quite that old. It's only been, oh, there's my family. All right. It's only been about 25 years since I was in grad school, and I did speak on grace in that chapel. And what I can say is now someone that's 50 is that grace just gets richer and richer. That the older you get, hopefully, the more powerful it becomes. Paul said to Timothy, grow in the grace of Jesus. Be strong in the grace of Jesus. So keep pursuing that. So eventually I did graduate, and then I went to grad school at Wheaton College, and you saw a glimpse of it just a minute ago. And so to help me be a bit more real to you, I thought I'd bring pictures of my family. I got married to my wife, Jamie, right after grad school, and so that's her in the upper left. There's Alexa in the lower right. My oldest boy, Nate, adopted from India. I was on the top right. There's Russell above my head, and there's our precious daughter, Lucia, who's 6 now. And so just in case you're wondering, yes, we have a perfect family. Yes, we have a perfect family. Now, that's not true, of course. You would know if you were at supper last night that that's not what it's really like. But we are grateful to have a family. So yes, as June mentioned, I have been a psychologist for roughly 16 years or so. And I've logged a whole bunch of hours with folks one-on-one. And it's been quite a journey to gradually walk with people from grief to comfort, from struggles to flourishing, from being fake or superficial to more genuine and authentic. And what I can say, in case you're wondering if the gospel really works or if talking to a Christian therapist really works, if you have a good one and you follow them, and follow the Lord's leading, I do believe it can lead to transformation. That's just what I'm saying. And as I mentioned in the bio, I've had the chance to work with folks from the Adventist world for about 10 years. And that's been a great run, great ride. I've really enjoyed it. And this morning when we were worshiping, the crazy thing is that I started to tear up. I started to tremble. And it wasn't because I was anxious. I mean, I am a little anxious, but it wasn't because of that. It's like, oh my goodness, the Spirit of God is in this place. And so I'm delighted that there's so many kids here, because you guys are kids, right? Because I could be a dad to you guys. Let's just call a spade a spade. But following the gospel and seeing the way that the Spirit's alive here gives me great hope for your futures and for the people that you're going to impact. Well, this morning my topic, I believe, is something that's critical to your level of happiness and fulfillment. So the question I have to ask is, anyone here remotely interested in enjoying greater happiness? Yeah, that sounds fairly compelling. Okay. What about fulfillment? Does fulfillment have any draw? Does that like seem meaningful to you? Okay, a couple charismatic folks are raising their hands. I'm delighted to see that. Now, when I'm talking about happiness and fulfillment, I'm not talking about a fake happiness. I'm not talking about pretend fulfillment. I'm talking about the real deal. I'm serious in that. And so let's take a look at our topic. The topic, as it's been mentioned, is boundaries. Now, you might have heard of the term boundaries because you might have read the book by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Anybody read that book by any chance? A few of you old people have. Well, I have the book, but I didn't read it because I wanted to give you something fresh. And so if I happen to quote them or reference their topic, if the academic dean is here, I'm not intentionally plagiarizing. Okay? So what is a boundary? Or what do I mean by boundaries? Well, I would say first, a boundary is honoring what brings lasting happiness. Secondly, I would say that a boundary is honoring what brings life to others and to yourself. All right? And finally, I would say a boundary is honoring what pleases the Lord. That would be the third thing, honoring what pleases the Lord. Now, I have to be candid. I've got to be transparent. Learning to honor boundaries well in how we treat others and how we let them treat us and how we seek to please the Lord, that, frankly, can take a lifetime to get really good at. I mean, if we're being honest here, it's not like you're going to be awesome at this in the next 2 weeks, okay? Especially if you come from some of the struggles that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. This takes a lifetime. So please plan for the long haul on this topic, all right? But I believe that as you pursue growing and honoring boundaries, I think you'll experience greater freedom, greater fulfillment, and greater happiness. And to give you fair warning, I would say to the extent that you don't learn to honor boundaries, I'm not trying to be Mr. Depression here, but I would say to the extent that you don't learn to honor boundaries, I believe the more regrets, the more pain, the more shame, and the more darkness you'll live in. That's just the truth. I wish I could make that different, but if you choose not to acknowledge this, it just means you're listening to the dark, as I would say to my kids. Well, when we talk about boundaries, I think it's important to think about what are the biggest boundary challenges, because boundaries are dicey. Boundaries are tough. It's very tempting to cross them or let others cross them with us. So as I thought about it and prayed about it, the two major ways I see boundary challenges emerging would be first, where out of indulgence or entitlement, or actually the first one is entitlement, okay? And that's where out of indulgence or arrogance, and I'm sad to say most of us, and I can relate to this myself, that's where we do what we want, when we want to, because we want to enjoy what I would call a dark pleasure that leaves us with guilt and shame and regret, and without repenting, frankly, I think that can leave us with a harder heart. Now, to help you out a bit, let's explore where this comes from, because we don't come by massive entitlement automatically, okay? There's an environmental factor here that's important to be aware of if you're going to make your way out of this. Now, I know there's the truth that we're born into sin. I know that's real. I know that we're all naturally selfish. That just kind of comes with the package. I wish that weren't the case, but that's what is. So what can be worse on top of that, though, is when in your family, if you experience neglect or abuse early on, some of us can be vulnerable to using that neglect as an excuse or a reason to say, well, because I didn't get what I want when I wanted when I was a kid, now I can have what I want. Do you understand what I'm saying? So because I didn't get that, now I can have this. Doesn't matter how it impacts others, right? The kicker is that doesn't lead to life or happiness, right? Now, another honest way that we can come by entitlement is if one or both of our parents happen to be really selfish. That's out there, right? So if you see a mom or a dad doing what they want when they want to, and you see the short-term satisfaction that comes from that, who wouldn't want to copy that, right? That's easy to fall into. Another way that we can fall into entitlement is, frankly, when we're spoiled. I'm sure none of you here were spoiled, right? But I know of families where that's happened, where one child, especially over the others, kind of the Joseph deal, is given special treatment. There's one story that I'll go into just briefly where this one boy was given the special plate, okay? And so it actually had the word special on it. And for a while when they were growing up, he and his sister would switch off who got the special plate, especially at birthdays. But one time when it was the sister's birthday, she had the special plate in front of her, and the brother said, I want the special plate. I want the special plate. But it's your sister's birthday. I want the special plate. I want the special plate. And what happened? He got the special plate. So, fast forward 10, 15 years, he gets married, and his entitlement shows up dramatically in his marriage, shows up dramatically in how he parents. And then his entitlement takes him into further ignorance, if you will, and he destroys his marriage and hasn't seen his kids for the last 2 years. So entitlement can be kind of like a snowball, that the more that you indulge it, the worse it can get. Now, another way that entitlement sneaks up is if you happen to be really handsome or really beautiful, okay? I know there's a lot of you in this room, so there's lots of temptation, right? So that are beautiful and handsome. But the more beautiful you are, or the more handsome you are, sometimes you can use your appearance, right, to get your way. Is that remotely true? Is that possible at times? Yes, it is. And so that's an extra temptation, because if you indulge in that to get what you want, then I think your heart's going to get smaller and smaller because you're leaning more in towards the dark. And that's a terrible place to be. Now, let's talk about the other side, enabling. This is where we let others cross our boundaries, where we let them, for various reasons, take advantage of us, exploit us, abuse us, if you will. And this is where, in terms of what the other people can be like, they can be like slick, or manipulative, or really handsome, the things I just talked about. And all of a sudden, out of fear, or naivete, or ignorance, or out of a low sense of worth, you compromise. You give up something that's really precious to you. You make decisions that you know aren't going to help you. And as a result, you experience regret, guilt, shame, remorse, things like that, right? And it's no fun at all. So how do we find ourselves vulnerable to those places on the enabling side? Well, this is, again, where we go back to neglect and abuse. If you experienced a lot of neglect or abuse, I guess the way I'd say it is that dangerous lies can sneak in. So Satan uses those times when we're hurting the most, where he's really crafty, right? So he'll sneak in a lie. Well, that's because you don't have much value. Or it's because it's your fault. Or you don't really have enough worth for someone really to honor you. Or you can feel like you get so little attention that if you get some attention, even if they're exploiting you, at least that's something. And if you experience that kind of abuse or neglect, it's also easier to not trust the Lord because it's so hard to trust others, right? So it's really hard to step out in faith and set that limit. So all these things make it easier for us to be vulnerable to letting others exploit us. So my point here in all this is that when it comes to boundaries and the challenges with them, there's lots of traps. There's lots of different ways that we can step off the narrow path, if you will, into pain, guilt, shame, remorse, things like that. And as I was praying about this talk and thinking about, like, you guys are in your early 20s, late teens, something like that, and that again was roughly 100 years ago, but it's like you've got so much life in front of you, should the Lord tarry, right? You've got so much life in front of you, and it's like, well, if you can figure out how to honor boundaries better, as far as how you treat others and how you let people treat you, my goodness, your life can be so much better. So that's part of what I want to get to in a little bit. But the next thing we have to look at is, where did all this come from really? Why is honoring boundaries and standing up for our boundaries so difficult? What's up with that is the question. Well, this is where we have to go to what I'm calling the enormous stumble, and that's my term for the fall, where the truth is all of our problems at some level go back to fateful decisions that were made that, just are at this point. And so this is where we have to introduce what I would call the antagonist of antagonists, okay? So this introduces someone, and in my clinical work, I've seen darkness pretty clearly. I've worked with someone that's been with a number of people that have been terribly abused. And you get a sense for the face of evil when you're working with someone that's experienced so much darkness. And I think the truth is, folks, that if you saw the face of Satan, I really do think you would be absolutely terrified. I mean, if you didn't have Jesus like right there next to you, even if you did, I think you'd still be freaked out, frankly. So he is terrifying, and it's really hard to wrap our minds around it. But the truth is, just to review, just to remind you, that Satan hates goodness, hates it. He hates innocence. He hates beauty. He loves to steal happiness, intimacy, rest, freedom, and our true sense of worth. He loves to exploit, and candidly, he has no problem deliberately deceiving. That's just the truth. And he loves to entice people into exploiting or enabling. And then, just to make things even worse, to really have you get a sense for what this is like, one of the things that I think is more fun for him is that when he can make us in his image, right, to make us conform to his image, unlike the Lord where we voluntarily conform to him, he loves to oppress and then have us be oppressors, have us do his dirty work, if you will. So that's pretty intense, right? I mean, it's sobering. It's a large truth. But I believe if we want to become mature believers, and if we want to learn how to honor boundaries well, we have to become skillful in learning to see through and reject Satan's lies. Does that make sense, right? Can I get a little amen? Amen. That was pretty little, but I'll work with it. Okay. Now, if we're going to really understand this, I know this can be reviewed for some of you, but I think it's really important. We have to go back to the garden. And this is where God sets up the original boundary, right? Boundaries didn't come out of nowhere. God sets up the original boundary, which is, I made all these glorious trees, made all this for you to eat and for you to enjoy, but there's this one tree that I don't want you to eat from. That's what I'm saying, right? Now, I don't have time to go into this in great depth, but there's a book called The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis, which is an outstanding book that helps you understand why love requires freedom and how freedom requires the possibility that evil could exist. So if you want to dig into that, that's the place to go. But so we've got the scenario. Adam and Eve hanging out, enjoying the beauty of creation, but there's this one tree that they can't eat from, right? So Satan, the crafty one, the ultimate exploiter, comes in, and his goal is to have these two violate or dishonor God's boundary, right? That's what he's all about. In this case, I would say his tactic is, how can he get Eve to be entitled? How can he exploit her ignorance and vulnerability? You know, Adam has his too, but he's focusing on her for whatever reason. And so he's wanting to get her to mistrust the Lord. He's wanting to get her to believe that somehow she can find a happiness greater than what she can find in him who, unbeknownst to her at a certain level, is the ultimate source of happiness, right? Well, Satan's goal with Adam, as it turns out, is to have Adam enable, to have Adam go passive, to not assert himself appropriately, and perhaps he's afraid of losing Eve's approval or affection. Maybe that was going on. It's like, well, if I follow the Lord, I might lose her. And he's not able to stay in a place where he trusts the Lord and obeys him above all else. So what happens? Well, as you know, Satan won, and we are left reeling from the chaos and damage that's followed from that century since. And so that's what we're up against. That's what we're up against. That battlefield that we live in now plays out that tension around enabling and entitlement day after day after day, right? Well, you might be wondering, what about your experience, Mr. Psychologist, Mr. Smarty Pants, right? Do you struggle with this stuff at all? Well, of course I do. Like I said earlier, the movement towards maturity is gradual. And we'll talk about how to do that, how to honor boundaries better in a bit, but I can say certainly what I've talked about when it comes to an entitlement or enabling, yeah, I can relate to that. Now, I have to indulge here just because it's a college campus. So when it comes to boundaries, one thing I'm remarkably thankful for is how for Jamie and myself, we honor boundaries very well in our relationship, our dating relationship. And I would say that's because we made commitments to ourselves, commitments to others, and commitments to friends about what our standards were, all right? And through the grace of God, we honored those very, very well. And I have no regrets about how we forsook current pleasure for later pleasure. So I just want you to noodle on that or pray about that if that's something you're grappling with. There's absolutely no regrets for honoring boundaries when it comes to a dating context. And at some level, I just want to reinforce what you already know. So let's see. So the whole point that this talk is moving towards is the reality that we need a guide. We need somebody to help us with this mess that we're in, where life is way harder probably than we'd like to admit. It's much more draining and demanding and challenging than we'd like, especially around the area of temptation. And so we need someone who has navigated their way through life without messing up. Someone who has made it through all the traps around entitlement or enabling and never chose poorly. Never chose poorly. And as you can imagine, this someone would be Jesus, right? So he is the one that never messed up. This is like 30 years, 33 plus years where he never made a mistake. He never fell for any of the traps. Now, what I want to say as a guy who's 50 is that, and for folks that have grown up in Christian homes, I know this is especially difficult, but it's easy to think that you know Jesus better than you really do. Like you've heard about him your whole life, you've had him read about and talked about, you go to church on Sabbath, you go on Wednesday night, et cetera, and the temptation is, well, I know Jesus, I'm good on that. I'll be contemporary, I'm down with that, right? I'm all over that. But what I can say as someone that's, again, old, is that over my past, 30 odd years, that I've been spending time in prayer and in the Word. Wheaton's a Christian grad school, right? So there's lots of time in the Lord there, time in service, time in community, time in worship. That in this past year, 49, 50, I've learned so much more about Jesus, and he's become so much more real to me. So if you think you know him well now, well, I'm happy for you. I guess what I want to say is there's so much more. There's so much more. Lots of folks think they know everything they need to know about Jesus by the time they're 22, and that's how they live most of their lives, right? But there's this infinite treasure that is Jesus that I really want to encourage you not to stop pursuing him once you're free from this place, right, from college. So let me talk just a bit about him, just to hopefully increase your desire to spend time with him, because that's one of the greatest ways to honor boundaries better. So when we talk about Jesus, the first thing we have to say is that he's not entitled. He's not entitled. So he came to love, he came to serve, he never exploited, never manipulated. And this is someone where if there was anyone in the history of the world that had the capacity to exploit, he can do all these miracles, right, for good. Certainly, if he wants what he wants when he wants it, he could pull that off, right? But he never did. He never did. Secondly, he doesn't enable. Jesus and enabling do not go hand in hand, right? So you might recall the time in John 2 where he was getting more and more popular. People were really digging his ministry. All these cool things were happening. And some folks wanted to make him king. They wanted to make him more and more popular, give him more and more power. But it says in John 2, he knew what was in a man. And he knew that going down the path of finding life through pleasing others would never work. That would just lead to the dark. So he never went there. Then there's another story where when Peter tried to say, no, you're not going that way, Lord, right? Remember that? When Peter had a plan for him and Jesus was about to give up his life, right? So because Jesus did not give in to fear, even to give up his life on a cross, when Peter brought that up, he said, as you know, probably, get thee behind me, Satan, right? And just as a quick aside, I'm guessing the disciples teased Peter about that at one point, right? It's like, Satan, hey, what's up, Satan? How's it going, man? And I think that must have been one of the inner jokes, you might say. But my larger point here is that Jesus never gave in to enabling. He never let fear or intimidation or the loss of something force him to make a decision. That's just not who he was. He was very secure in the Lord, very committed to fulfilling his Father's will. A couple other things. He was wise as opposed to foolish or ignorant. Okay, he knew the Lord so well, knew the Word so well that he never fell for any of Satan's tricks. That's someone you can learn a lot from. And he was humble as opposed to arrogant. Given all the gifts that he had, it would have been so easy for him to be arrogant, right? I mean, if there's, again, anyone that could be arrogant, like I know all that, like he's always the smartest guy in the room. Like that was always the case. But he never put other people down, never exploited that. As it says in Matthew 11:29, he was humble and gentle in heart. That's what Jesus is like. So if you're looking for someone to learn from that embodies all the character qualities that lead to life, my goodness, he's your man. He's the guy. He's the ultimate guide. So I got to say one more thing, though, in terms of Jesus, because when it comes to struggling with enabling others, one of the things that's hardest is that we don't know our worth. We don't trust our sense of worth. And Jesus, because he was so close to the Father, because he knew the Father's love so deeply, that really wasn't ever an issue for him. I mean, granted, on the cross, the worst time ever, he struggled with that. But, it says Jesus knew glory that the Father gave him before the world began in John 17. So there was this enormous way that the Father communicated his love that was so real to Jesus. And so if you want to know how to grow in your sense of worth, getting to know Jesus better is a great way to see what it's like and then to experience his worth that he gives to you. Okay, so we're finally to the point of how do you honor boundaries better? How do you do that? Well, this may sound old school, but I'm old, so that's good. We're good with that. The first thing that you have to do, whether you struggle with entitlement or enabling or some combination of the two, is you got to confess and repent. You got to confess and repent. This is about telling Jesus the truth. This is about saying what is, acknowledging it, saying, I'm sorry, it was wrong, please forgive me. That's like your starting point. And the truth is, should you live to be 80, you'll probably be doing that for another 60 years. I mean, that's something that you want to get comfortable doing as it's necessary. Now, if you happen to fall in the entitlement camp, the standard thing I recommend is to invite Jesus into your entitlement. Just ask him in. Come into the entitlement. My arrogance, my insensitivity to others, my vulnerability to take advantage of people, please come in and heal me. And then you ask for, I think, a greater ability to honor him and to trust him. And finally, a greater ability to see people more clearly, to see them and their value and their worth, and that following you leads to life. Now, let's say you happen to be more likely to be an enabler, okay? So this is where I think it's really important to invite Jesus into your fear of being rejected, your fear of being abandoned, your fear of a replication of what happened to you when you were younger, okay? I think it's important to invite him into your struggle with a sense of worth. I mean, that's where you're just, again, being honest. Please come into this area where I don't think I'm worth very much, and so I give myself away. Please help me stop doing that. Please help me find more and more of my worth in you, and please help me find ways to reject the lie that I don't have value. Please give me greater strength and ability to do that. And then I think it's important, just like with the other one, to ask God for wisdom about what to do when, to have him help you see people more clearly and be in a better place to do what's right. And ask for the grace to trust him more with your life and with your future and with your relationships. So what are the other things to do, just to wrap this up? Well, I think it's also important just to reemphasize spending time in the Word, ideally daily, and ask him to penetrate your heart to help you honor boundaries better. And there's another piece that's maybe a little bit unique that you've not heard about, and this is around doing values and vision work. Values and vision work is something I do in my coaching work, and I've done this for 10 plus years. And so what that's about is clarifying what matters the most to you, your passions, how you want to conduct your life. And then vision work is where you picture your ideal future. Like what do you want to move into? Who would you love to be? What kind of walk would you like to have with the Lord? What kind of relationships would you like to have? And to help you out with that, and you don't have to give me your email address, so I'm not like asking for anything, but I've got 3 documents that I put together that I've used again for years that will help you with that. One's a values clarification exercise, one's a vision work exercise, and then there's an essay that explains the why and how of doing godly vision work. And if you're curious about that, if you'd like to dive deep on that, you can go to my website, drnickhoward.com, and actually the top right part of the menu bar, there's a word that says values. Go to the values piece, click on that, and that'll give you access to the 3 exercises. And if you want to sign up for my weekly blog, which is about flourishing and things like that, you're welcome to do that there. That'll be up for roughly the next week or so, okay? Then there's 2 last things to do. Second, but the first of the last 2, is to let people in. This is about asking the Lord for the grace to be vulnerable, to tell people the truth about where you're at, and ask them to pray for you around those issues. And then if you've got long-standing challenges where it's been hitting you for a long time, to see a Christian psychologist, speak to the chaplain, whatever, to ask them to journey with you so that you can tease out those lies and be in a better place to trust the Lord. So all that to say, folks, Jesus came to set you free. He came to give you life to the full. He came to help you flourish, and he really, really means that. And so to grow in that, I really encourage you to follow him more than you think is wise, to take greater risks in terms of inviting him in to the nooks and crannies of your soul so that he has a chance to minister to you and transform you and help you be all that you're called to be. Thanks for listening. It was great being with you. Take care.